Hi everybody, welcome to my studio in Harbour Hill, just outside Buxton. So I'm just going to walk you through the studio and give you an idea of where the pieces are created and how I do it and the process involved. So as you can see here, lots of room, storage obviously over this side, and then we've got views that way out the back garden up the hill. And I live in a semi-rural location, so basically we can walk out the back garden and we can walk straight up the hill and straight out onto the moorlands behind us, up onto Axe Edge or over the back towards Earl Sterndale. So as you can see, I've got lots of work laid out here, thinking about the online show that's coming up and the pieces I want to exhibit. And then over here, got more of the end where I do the actual pieces and produce the work. So it's a north-facing studio, so I can sit at this end and get some really lovely light and look down the valley and get wonderful views, and also be very nosy and sit on my chair and peer down the lane and see what's going on and what's happening in the world outside, as you can see there. So we live in a lovely little lane with old quarrymen's cottages here. So this is the area that I work at. This is my drawing board here. I used to work at an easel, but I had a problem with my wrist from working upright, working at an angle, so now I have to work at a slope. And this is lovely for pastels though, because the dust there isn't that much dust actually, but the dust will actually drop down slightly, so that's useful. And as you can see, it is a slightly dusty exercise, but it's not too bad. So you can see my large collection here of all the different colours that I use, which is fairly organised, not incredibly organised, but somewhat organised. And then I have pieces up on the wall, which are either pieces I'm doing at the moment or pieces I've just finished, like this piece of apple cross over here. Or if I just pan back round, you can see beyond the window at this side, there's lots of work on the board here, which is sort of ongoing work that I'm deciding what to do with and finishing off and so on, along with more framed pieces that are hanging ready to go to galleries. And things like this recently finished commission piece here. Okay, so that's giving you an idea of my space and the place that I create the work and the context that the work is produced in. This studio was created and built with the money I earned by winning the Buxton Spa Prize in 2016, which is very lovely, and it's given us a really fantastic space. And a day like today, as you can see, it's a really lovely quiet area to work in and very peaceful. And I can also watch the weather coming down the valley out of these windows at the end here, which is what I do most of the time really, get quite distracted. Okay, so next I'm going to talk to you about the papers that I use and give you an idea of the ways that the actual pieces are produced. I use three main papers. Now this one here is my go-to favourite. This is a white piece, but it comes in all different sorts of colours, as you can see these ones do as well. Now it comes in a big range of colours. You can buy pads with sets of different colours in it. And this is the Clairefontaine Pastel Matte. Now on this paper it's got a very, very strong tooth. So when you put pastel on it, you do that and you rub, nothing. Again, if I put two colours on and rub, not a lot happens. It means that initially it feels quite stiff and hard work to work with, and you think, good grief, you know, how do I get this to do anything? But it's great for either quick pieces where you leave it looking quite loose, or you can work layer upon layer and really build it up. I also like using occasionally Fisher paper. Now with the Fisher paper, this is, can you hear that? It's extremely abrasive, and I've managed to clean my fingers quite easily there. It feels like 400 grade sandpaper basically, which is what it is, but the surface has been placed on with a waterproof backing, so that if you wet it you can use things like inks, watercolours and so on first, and then you can work over it. So it gives you options for different ways of working. The final paper that I use is Sennelier Pastel Card, and I've got three different colours here. Now it comes in various different shades, the same way that the Pastel Matte does. So this again is a rough surface, but it's not abrasive in the same way that the Fisher paper is. It's got a very strong texture, but it's a softness to it. It's a different way of working. Now with this paper, when you put a bit on the surface, what you'll find is you get a really even textured mark. So you've got a lovely textured surface and a lovely clean edge on it. So you can work building up mark making on this surface and leave it looking very loose. So you don't do blending on this paper. So it's good for quick pieces, it's good for expressive work. This piece has been created on Fisher 400 paper, which lets you work with liquid. And as you can see, I've worked in with liquid. As you can see, these marks here, which are brush marks and drip marks. So it is pastel, but it's been sprayed over with something called pastel liquefier. And you can see some lovely brush marks here, for example. But once it dries, once you've brushed across it and worked it in, it then becomes a pastel surface again. So once it's dry, you can then work back into it with pastel and charcoal detail. So this pathway here, for example, is when I've worked back into it, as is this sort of fence marking and these trees here. So that's to give you an idea of different ways you can work with pastel. It needn't be super realistic, it can be quite expressive and loose at the same time as well. So this is the usual way that I work, by using lots of layers of pastel and working over pastel matte surface and adding those layers and creating wonderful atmospheric cloud effects. I can get quite obsessed with doing all these little cloud details and adding layer upon layer of colours. So a piece like this would probably have around 15 to 20 layers of pastel on this paper, which is then worked in using my fingers, but also using something called a pastel shaper tool. So I'll build the layers up with my fingers, but then I'll work on top with a shaper tool. So this is a pastel shaper tool. It's a silicone end, so it's quite soft, quite flexible. What it does is it lets me control some of these fine details here. So this sort of thing here, we've got these very fine marks and edges and more subtle effects. This will be created by adding layers of pastel with using the tip or the side of the pastel, but then rubbing it over with this sort of shaper tool, and then it gives you a softer blend and a more detailed blend than your finger does. So the finger tends to do things more like this, where it's quite a large blended area, and the sharper edges, like this sort of hillside edge here, for example, would be created using that shaper tool. Well, I hope that's given you an insight into how I work and how I turn these blocks of colour, which are a mixture of pigment all mixed together with a binder, and these papers into my pieces of artwork. Thank you for watching, and I hope I'll be able to see you one day soon in my studio for you to come and collect some pieces of work, or to come along and do a session with me